Fiume, Rovinj and Klagenfurt, we are proceeding to talk about workers in Ljubljana. Our last speaker is Urška Strle from University of Ljubljana. She graduated in history at the Faculty of Art in Ljubljana between 2006 and 2010. She worked as a young research fellow at the Slovenian Migration Institute at the Science Research Center of the Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Arts. She completed her PhD on the topic of Slovenians in Canada, and she was selected for a postdoctoral fellowship to research Slovenians in Canada, funded by the International Committee for the Canadian Studies in Ottawa. Today she will speak on Tobacco Factory Ljubljana in light of workers' booklets and registers from 1912 to 1952.
Thank you, Eva, for the introduction, and good afternoon to everyone. I hope you still have some strength to listen to the last paper of this panel. My paper is a reflection of considerations emerging from not yet completed examination of files of the Tobacco Factory of Ljubljana. So far, I've focused predominantly on serial historical sources, namely workers' booklets and workers' registers, which contain personal data and work-related information. I observed administrative entries over the bare factual statistics and tried to elucidate aspects of changing social processes, such as workers' physical and social mobility, job fluctuations, trends of employability, workers' organizations, and interpersonal relations, thus adding to numbers and facts a juicy historical matter. Why a factory of tobacco products, which employed predominantly women in economically rather backward town of the first half of the 20th century, is significant at all? Although the current scholar trend is leaned towards writing a comprehensive global history of labor, notable historians such as Jan Lucassen, Marcel van der Linden, Andreas Eckert, and Friedrich Kopper, to name just a few, express awareness of a myriad of regional variations of world economic development, of which particularly understudied areas should be brought into focus and contextualized globally. Many of global socio-economic phenomena affected work processes and labor relations in the Ljubljana's tobacco factory, while its archival material also mirrored these trends, nuanced by its own local and historical specifics. Despite their richness, historical sources of Tobacco Factory Ljubljana remain inadequately analyzed and failed to be compared to any tobacco manufacturing elsewhere. My current state of research is based on empirical findings, while its comparative prospect is still rather weak. I'm having high hopes that this workshop will add to it considerably. As you can see from the title itself, my paper deals with quite a dynamic period of social and political terms. It covers the final years of Habsburg Empire, the kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, and the initial years of Tito's Yugoslavia, which with breaks turbulently inflicted by the two world wars. The period also witnessed a profound economic crisis which struck in the 1930s. Such a temporal framework of 40 years was chosen deliberately to detect continuities and discontinuities of social processes affecting the sphere of labor. I also want to outline the trends of employability and interpersonal relations in gender perspective. In 1912, the tobacco factory already passed 40 decades of continuous production of various tobacco goods. It was part of the Austrian state monopoly, administering 30 other tobacco factories in Austria, established in order to increase belated industrialization in the state and to collect a significant taxes. Tobacco Factory of Ljubljana was the second largest factory in the state, labeled as the first-class tobacco factory. Till the end of the war, the factory was the greatest factory in the town, which demonstrated quite a dispersed and small-range industrial and artisan production. The establishment of the factory contributed to an evident shift in the town's employment picture if we take into focus the aspect of gender. From 1890s on, women started to outnumber men among Ljubljana's industrial workers, and more than half of them worked in the factory. The Count K tobacco factories were regarded socially oriented. Also, the one in Ljubljana had a dining room, decent toilets, medical spaces, a library, and a kindergarten. Women of Slovenian descent prevailed among unqualified workers. Males of Slovenian descent were also qualified artisans, while administration was almost exclusively male and almost German-speaking. Mostly German-speaking. The first two male auxiliary office workers were employed only in 1913. Beside occasional ethnic clashes, the factory workers were divided also ideologically. Namely, two unions were active in the factory, conservative Christian Democrats and liberal Social Democrats. The conservatives embraced around 90% of working force. The memo booklet, written by Christian Democrats, reveals that organized workers gradually bettered their conditions in terms of salaries, attitudes of superiors, health, and working place. The situation was far from optimal, but much better than elsewhere. The cigarelice, colloquial term, literally meaning female cigar makers, were regarded the most privileged workers in the country and attracted a lot of younger girls. The growing trend of working women shows also the need for a cash due to increasing consumerism and personal independence. In 1912, the number of workers starts to decline. The working force, the first time after 17 years, dropped below 2,200 persons. This was a sign of economic recession, conditioned also with the start of tragic prelude of the Great War, that is the Balkan Wars, which greatly affected the broader area. Also, Austro-Hungary felt its consequences, as was involved with Southeastern Europe economically. The Great War imposed a huge change in tobacco production and trade, but also a notable drop in administrative activities. As the majority of white-collar workers were enlisted, there is a grade of historical sources for all years of the war. Comparison of various sources elucidate inconsistencies. Whereas workers' registers enlist 40 new employees, namely female refugees from Galicia and Istria, many of them were from the tobacco factory of Rovinj. Newspapers and various memoirs report on work of many refugees from Galicia as well. The inclusion of former Carniola and its capital Ljubljana to the kingdom SHS demonstrated an intense discontinuity on many levels. The state tobacco monopoly moved from Vienna to Belgrade, which from 1918 supervised 8 tobacco factories, among which the Tobacco Factory Ljubljana was the oldest and the biggest. The most evident change to a nowadays historian lies in the nature of administrative sources, which became more sporadic, poor, and statistically undervalued, especially in comparison to former Austrian standards. War exhausted the tobacco warehouse. Production fell for over 300% compared to the pre-war times. The number of workers almost halved, and the social security was at stake. Poor working conditions, indecent salaries, layoffs, and growing inflation in the immediate post-war made tobacco workers organized two major strikes, which interestingly women did not attend. Employment rate increased in the mid-20s when economic situation slightly bettered. Despite all efforts, workers' conditions did not improve. Workers' booklets of interwar times demonstrate a division of working force between permanent, temporary, and seasonal workers. Whereas permanent workers till 1913 gradually presented the largest group of employees, they became a rare species after 1918, getting the status only after 5 years of permanent work. The status of temporary or seasonal worker was much cheaper for the management, as they were not entitled to receive the pension insurance. Moreover, registers of permanent workers listed no women from 18 to 35. This position was only reserved for a few dozens of qualified artisans and some male workers. A lot of layouts due to lack of work followed in the 30 and 31, many left by themselves. Unqualified workers of both sexes had the same salary before the crisis. Payment cut of 20% hit them both. However, an increase of salaries from 32 on did not count for women. Women were also not entitled to receive children's benefits unless they were widows or wives of disabled. Despite all the difficulties, the position of tobacco worker was still among the most welcome among the factory workers. This indicates difficult workers' position across the country, which reflects through the archival material as unstable, precarious, suggesting a lot of undeclared work. The tobacco production during the war, when Italian and later German management took control, dropped and could not satisfy smokers' needs. Tobacco products reached crazy prices on the black market and became regularized in 1944, whereby women were allowed twice less cigarettes daily than men. Only 17 worker booklets remained from the wartime. All belonged to women, but one. Workers' social structure resembled the interwar times, as they were working predominantly as housemates, textile workers, sellers, and brick makers in the nearby manufacture before they were hired at the tobacco factory. After June 45, the factory was again led from Belgrade. Once again, tobacco factory entered the post-war in red numbers, damaged of bombing, with outdated machinery, reduced working force, and without sufficient supplies of tobacco. According to workers' booklets, new massive employments only occurred between 46 and 48. Up to 52, innovation, economization, and voluntary work were stimulated with financial awards, which were usually higher for men than women. The trend of the first post-war years show that working force of both genders was getting more diverse in terms of working experiences and positions within the factory. Women present about 75% of all working force and exhibited interesting diapason of skills, although unqualified female workers still present over 80% of all women employed. Traditional female occupations as domestic servants, cooks, seamstresses, textile workers, sellers, and brickmakers were upgraded with quite a few office workers and with a noteworthy share of unusual categories, such as bakelite worker, glass inspector, railway worker, and various types of artisans and industrial workers. Such a shift, evident from workers' booklets, my design of modernization, but also a reflection of economic hardship which accelerated during the wartime. One might ask why workers' booklets remained in the archive of the factory at all, as they are usually returned to the worker after the end of the employment. The fact is that workers' booklets in the archive were invalidated in late 45, and this presents a major part of them. But there is also a significant share of those who were not nullified, covering the period from 1912 on. Is that a consequence of workers moving back to the private sector after they married? A reflection of illegal immigration, which struck both post-war eras considerably, or just an administrative inconsistency? Workers' booklets, as a historical source, should definitely get some more attention. The graphical layout of workers' booklets alone changed over the period of 40 years 5 times. So did its categories and entries. These shifts are very interesting for observation, as they reflect certain structural changes in the society over time. But I will leave this issue for another occasion. There is another interesting aspect I would like to address instead. All these numerous and diverse workers I checked over the past months left traces not only in the state treasury and in the growing smoking habits of the population. They definitely generated intense interpersonal transactions, which, according to Charles Seeley, compound into identities, create and transform social boundaries, and accumulate into durable ties. This does not address only to strikes and protests for better working conditions and illegal activities for the good of the liberation movement during the war. The collective where women prevailed, where working processes, where women, once again, the collective where women prevailed, working processes where women worked one next to the other and associated also in the spare time, doubtlessly made space for debates over various life issues. Those must have touched upon also various taboos regarding pregnancy, motherhood, sexual matters, relations to men, etc. Such debates presented a variety of contrasting opinions over various issues personally. If personal contacts are one of the most effective channels influencing individual or collective disposition, Tobacco Factory of Ljubljana could indeed serve as an interesting observatory for social changes formed from below. In this direction, particularly, lies my future research curiosity about the tobacco workers. Thank you.